So anyone who follows me on social media will know that I talk about Geospatial-Next. Really the theme there is bringing geospatial to a wider audience, commercially, not necessarily consumers. So my sense is we have a bigger world to grow into. And geospatial to me really means GIS, it means remote sensing, it means digital reality, it means IoT. Anything that geospatial stands for, a place on Earth. So is that data? I'm really interested in particularly Earth observation as part of that conversation, and Maxime Lenormand, he does a terrific job in Minds Behind Maps, interviewing people that are really interesting in that particular sphere, and I follow them quite intently, those conversations. I follow them very closely, those conversations. Iain Woodhouse was on just recently, and he's a Scottish Earth observation expert, lecturer, and he works in the private sector as well. And he did had a very specific with Maxime on 𝗂𝗲𝗏. And I'm interested in 𝗂𝗲, and the start of the conversation is really focused on demystifying 𝗂𝗲. But what I found fascinating was the last part of the conversation, actually, which was a more general sort of geospatial conversation. So what I'm going to do over 2 or 3 videos is, and thanks to Maxime for letting me do this, is to chunk out pieces of that conversation and just provide us a little bit of commentary on it. So this is number 1, and what the focus here is really around data. So let me start the interview, and I'll jump in and just provide a little bit of commentary as we go through.
So let me ask you maybe a bit of a philosophical question, but it's a very broad one, but I like asking it. What's the thing that's most exciting for you right now in the whole Earth observation field?
I think, well, of course, that's partly biased, but in terms of the things that I'm interested in.
Sure.
But there is a collection of, from my Scottish perspective, it's a data 𝗂𝗲, right? So there's this mass amount of data, and we haven't quite worked out how to feed it through the pipe so that people actually get running water in all their houses, right? And I think that's where we're at, is that to some extent, you can't have the infrastructure for the the water supply until you've got enough water to make it worthwhile distributing. And the last 10 years has seen this huge collection of Earth observation data. And I can't remember what some credible statistic, like the amount of Earth observation data collected in the last year or 2 is more than everything that's been collected ever before that, some crazy statistic like that. So it's a very exponential growth. So I think we're just at that cusp now where there is so much data that we just have to find ways to pipe it into people's homes so they can actually use it in a sensible way.
So I'm a massive fan of analogies, and I love how Iain uses the analogy of piping water into people's homes. I'll broaden what Ian's talking about there. He's talking about Earth observation data. I'll broaden it and saying geospatial data. So that's not just what we're collecting from satellites, but aerial, drones, ground. It's not just LiDAR, 3-dimensional data, it's vector data, it's imagery, it's 𝗂𝗲. It's all these different data sets that we're collecting. But I take his point, we've now got this massive pool of data. Is how do we best get that data into people's homes? So I really love his analogy there.
That we get to that point where we start to realize, and it might not be the killer application. It's just a lot of very key valuable applications, right? It doesn't have to be one thing that's going to completely break the dam and all the data comes flying out and suddenly becomes valuable. It might be just lots of little things, but we have to find ways to make sure that everybody understands what that data might do for them and how it works.
So everyone understands what that data can do for them. The conversation, and I'll share this in future videos, moves onto non-experts in those fields, but I love what he says there about not only making sure that we're sharing it with a wider audience and they understand what it is and what value they get out of it, but also there isn't one single place where people can get this from. I mean, I think playing nicely, we tend to have been in a world where it's very segmented, we do this, we do this, we do this, and some geospatial companies pretend they do everything, but it's actually where it is if people are trying to make decisions and think through things. It's probably a combination of technologies. It's probably a combination of applications which will help people get to that final place, that final decision making, an action place. So I really like what Ian mentioned there about this sort of bring it to a wider group, but it's not necessarily one killer app that's going to solve the problem.
And that's how I got into things like 𝗪𝗏𝗧blocks, which is, you know, how do you make it really easy for the non-typical Earth observation expert to be able to inquire and investigate and explore the data and start to go, oh, I didn't realize you could see that. If you can do that, can you do that every day? Can you do that at finer, you know, I want to see more detail. And then when they start coming back those questions to say, yeah, I can see how I can use this, but it's not quite fine enough detail for me, or it's not quite often enough, then that starts feeding back to the, you know, the business plans of the next generation of the satellite companies to say, all right, if you need that this often in this particular location at that level of detail, and then we've got a deal, then yeah, okay, we'll fill that gap for you.
So non-geospatial experts saying, getting access to this and asking questions and saying, I didn't realize that you could do that. If you can do that, can you do this? To me, what Ian's talking about there, and again, we'll touch on this in as we extend the conversation in future videos, as I chop it up, as I mentioned at the start. Really, that has to be the goal of geospatial. Geospatial talks a lot about data. It talks a lot about the technology in the middle. It talks a lot about maps. I mean, it talks a lot about these things, but really it doesn't start from the top and start exposing people to the value that geospatial Earth observation in Ian's case, but again, broaden it, what geospatial data can provide to them. It's completely oblivious. They just know they have this great big mass of data, no idea what they're going to do with it. A lot of it's geospatial data. Where we need to get to is, as Ian says, is to sort of pipe that into people's homes and have it be accessible for a much wider audience. So that's video one. There'll be 2 or 3 more of these as I chunk through this, but like I said, it's a really exceptional interview, and I think breaking it up in this way helps, certainly helps me think through each of the pieces that Ian's talking about.